Continuing now with Dave Barry's Class Clown, the memoirs of a professional wise-ass. And last session we left off in the middle of Chapter 7, Books, Music, and Movies. Dave had just told about a movie that was based on a novel of his first novel, Big Trouble. And that after they attended advanced screening of the movie he and his wife had, the next morning he woke up to find, well, it was September 11th, 2001, and you know what happened that day. And as he says, it was not a good time to release a wacky movie comedy, especially one with a suitcase nuke on an airplane. So the release was delayed until April 2002. He talks about how it was just uncomfortable watching the movie. He didn't watch it again for years. It's always, in his mind, connected with 9/11. Anyway, he says, in fact, after the 2002 premiere, I didn't watch it again until 12 years later, when I presented it to an audience in St. Petersburg, Russia. To explain how that came about, I'm going to backtrack a bit because the story involves my friend and sometimes collaborator, Ridley Pearson. I met Ridley when we became original members of the Rock Bottom Remainders, a rock band of authors founded in 1992 by Kathy Goldmark. Members have come and gone, but over the years, the band, in addition to Ridley and me, has included Mitch Albom. He wrote Tuesdays with Morrie. I remember that name. Sam Barry, Tad Bartimus, Roy Blunt Jr., another excellent humorist. Robert Fulgham, Matt Groening of The Simpsons fame. Carl Hiaasen, Greg Iles, Mary Carr, Stephen King, Barbara Kingsolver, Greil Marcus, Dave Marsh, James McBride, Frank McCourt, Joel Selvin, Amy Tan, the Joy Luck Club, Scott Turow, and Alan Zweibel, who's a great humor writer over the years, comedy writer. And he, in a footnote, he adds, we've been greatly helped by two professional ringers, drummer Josh Kelly and saxophonist Erasmo Paolo, both great musicians and great guys. Also, we have a superb professional sound man, Gary Hirstius, who has been forced to listen to us at close range and still loves us. And for many years, we've been managed. This is basically an impossible job by Ted Heptigaber, who's also field coordinator of the Dave Barry for President Juggernaut. These are excellent writers, these members of the band. Some of them are even good musicians. But the Remainders are not a good band. We don't really even rise to the level of mediocre. Our genre, as Roy Blunt put it, is, quote, hard listening music. At one time, we had T-shirts that said, this band plays music as well as Metallica writes novels. Nevertheless, being in the Remainders has been, I say this without shame, one of the highlights of my life. I love the camaraderie, hanging out with other writers, talking about everything except our writing process, happily making fools of ourselves on stage. But I also love making music, however ineptly, with other people. I've been missing that experience since my Federal Duck days. And as bad as we are, we've gotten to play with some pretty great musicians, starting with rock legend Al Cooper, who courageously agreed to be our musical director in our early days. I'll never forget the pep talk he gave us after our first rehearsal. When we started this morning, we stunk, but by this afternoon, we stunk much better. Maybe eventually we can be just a faint odor. Another rock legend, the great Roger McGuinn, has played with the Remainders off and on for years. He's so good that he somehow manages to make us sound almost like the Byrds, especially when the rest of us turn our amps down to 0 or below. The late Warren Zevon, who was a buddy of Carl Hiaasen's, loved hanging out with the Remainders and joined us for many gigs. Leslie Gore got up with us once and sang It's My Party. Well, that was a big hit for her back in the 60s, I guess. We also backed up Judy Collins on Both Sides Now. And I'll mention I saw Judy Collins at the Eisman Theater in Richardson perform just a year and a half or so ago. So we also backed up Judy Collins on Both Sides Now, Darlene Love on He's a Rebel, and Gloria Gaynor on I Will Survive. And then there was the night in Los Angeles in 1994 when we were playing for a booksellers convention. We were down to our last song when we got word that a special guest was in the house and he was willing to get on stage with us. He wasn't an author, but we let him perform anyway because he was Bruce Springsteen. He strolled out in jeans, t-shirt, and a baseball cap, and the place went nuts. I handed him my guitar, thereby ensuring that I would forever after be able to claim I owned a guitar that had been played by Bruce Springsteen. Then we launched into our last song, which was Gloria. As it happens, I sing lead on that song. So when we get to the chorus, I spell out Gloria, and the backup singers respond, Gloria. What I am saying, in case you haven't figured it out, is that Bruce Springsteen sang backup for me. And that was the moment when his career really took off. Seriously, though, that was a very cool moment, one of many I've had thanks to the Remainders. But for me, the best thing about the band has been the friendships, which brings me back to Ridley Pearson. He and I bonded right away. He's the bass player and an excellent musician. I always stand next to him because I can rely on him to know important technical information, such as what specific song we're supposed to be playing. So Ridley and I became close friends, and in 2004 we became co-authors. The way that came about was Ridley was reading J.M. Barrie's Peter Pan to his daughter Paige when she stopped him and asked, "How did Peter Pan meet Captain Hook in the first place?" Ridley thought that was an excellent question. In fact, he thought the answer could be a book. He asked me if I'd be interested in working with him on a prequel to Peter Pan. I said yes because it sounded like a quick, fun little project. And it was fun, but it was not quick or little. In fact, it wound up dominating my writing life for the next half dozen years. We thought we were going to write a short children's book. We ended up writing a 450-page young adult novel, Peter and the Starcatchers. It did really well. It even became a Broadway play adapted by Rick Elise as Peter and the Starcatcher without the final S, which won 5 Tony Awards. Peter and the Starcatchers was published by Disney, which meant Ridley and I did some very Disney-fied promotional events. For a big book signing at the Walt Disney World Contemporary Resort, they built a mock pirate ship to serve as our backdrop, complete with a cannon that actually went boom. Also on hand were Disney people dressed as Peter Pan and Captain Hook. While we were waiting for the event to start, Ridley and I hung out in a tiny room with Peter Pan for about 15 minutes, just the three of us. That was awkward because as a Disney cast member in costume, he was required to remain in character at all times. I was unaware of this policy, so I attempted to make small talk with him. It did not go well. Me. "So how do you like working at Disney?" Peter Pan, placing hands on hips. "It's a beautiful day in Neverland." Me. 15 seconds of awkward silence. Peter Pan. "Have you seen Wendy?" If you want to experience a long 15 minutes, try hanging out in a small, confined space with Peter Pan. Ridley and I wound up writing 5 books in the Starcatchers series. We also wrote a standalone young adult novel called Science Fair, which resulted in one of my favorite fan letters ever from 2 elementary school boys. "Dear Mr. Barrie and Mr. Pearson, both of us think that your book Science Fair is one of the awesomest books out there. Just to warn you, 2 authors that our book club has written to have died. We hope that the curse skips you so that you can make a sequel as soon as possible. Sincerely, names. P.S. For most of the letter, we alternated writing 3 words at a time." Ridley and I went on many book tours together, but the most memorable was in 2014 when we traveled to Russia. We were part of the U.S. State Department's American Writers Series program, under which authors are sent over there to improve relations between the 2 nations. Clearly, this program did not work. As I write these words, the United States and Russia are practically at war. But I don't think it's fair to blame me. It was Ridley's fault. Seriously, though, Ridley and I did our best over there, despite challenging circumstances. And by challenging circumstances, I mean, in my case, a world-class case of the trots. On our second night in Moscow, I stupidly did the one thing you should never, ever do in Russia. I ate at a Mexican restaurant. It was operated by Russians, and Mexican food is not their forte. If I'm being honest, they're not that great at Russian food either. At this Russian Mexican restaurant, I ate what I later realized must have been a weaponized chimichanga. We should all pray for the sake of humanity that the Russians never unleash this thing on the rest of the world, because it caused me to develop a severe case of what gastroenterologists call CBS, or Chernobyl bowel syndrome. But aside from that experience, I enjoyed touring Russia at least those parts of Russia that were within sprinting distance of a bathroom. Ridley and I did a bunch of presentations for Russian audiences, talking about our careers and how we wrote the Starcatchers books. We had a slideshow, which included a picture of me in my newspaper columnist days, embarrassing my son Rob by picking him up at his middle school in the Oscar Mayer Wienermobile. And here's the picture. The Russian audiences would look at this photo. They don't have the Wienermobile over there. And I could tell they were thinking, how the hell did we lose the Cold War to these people? The groups we spoke to were generally polite and receptive. At the end of each talk, I asked them what stereotypical views they thought Americans held about Russians. Inevitably, they brought up two stereotypes, both of which they thought were unfair, that they drink vodka all the time and that they're all gangsters. This brings me finally back to Big Trouble, which, as you may recall, though I doubt it, is what started me on this digression about my friendship with Ridley. At the end of our Russia tour, I was asked to do a special event for the American consulate in St. Petersburg. Each month they held a movie night in the consul general's residence, with the Russian public invited to screenings of American films. Since I'd had a book made into a movie, they thought it'd be fun to show Big Trouble and have me introduce it to the audience. I hadn't seen the movie since I attended the premiere way back in 2002. So on the day of, and remember this is 12 years later. So on the day of the screening, to prepare my introduction, I reviewed the plot. That's when I realized that I was going to be standing in front of an audience of Russians who resent the fact that Americans stereotype them as gangsters, to introduce a movie that actually has some Russian characters in it, and they're gangsters. So that was a lot of fun, by which I mean not fun at all. In my introduction, I pointed out that while the Russian characters in Big Trouble were in fact criminals, they were at least intelligent criminals, whereas many of the American characters were both criminal and stupid. But I don't think this mollified the audience. It's possible that contrary to the entire purpose of the American Writers Series program, I actually worsened relations between the United States and Russia. I might, after all, be partly responsible for the fact that we're currently almost at war. If so, allow me to state in all sincerity, my bad. Not long after Big Trouble was originally released, I had another adventure in the movie industry. It began when I got this email. Hi, Dave. It's Steve Martin. I'm hosting the Oscars this year, 2003, and am trying to put together a team of geniuses to help me write it. Here's my question. Do you know any? I'm wondering if the idea appeals to you at all. You, me, Rita Rudner, and a few others. Best Oscar monologue ever. California. Tickets to the show. Fame. I know you won't do it, so go fuck yourself, Steve. Excuse the language, please. Of course I said yes. For one thing, I had long been a huge Steve Martin fan. For another thing, if I'd said no, Michelle would have divorced and killed me. She immediately started assembling her Oscars outfit. Literally within hours of when I received Steve's email, she had purchased uncomfortable shoes. A few months later, I flew to Los Angeles for the first writers' meeting. I was terrified. I'd never been part of anything like that. While the rest of the writers, Beth Armagida, Dave Boone, Andy Breckman, John Max, Rita Rudner, Robert Shapiro, and Bruce Valanche were experienced showbiz comedy pros. We met in a hotel conference room. I later wrote about that first meeting. Steve Martin was to my immediate left, taking notes on his laptop computer as the other writers tossed out idea after idea. This group process was unfamiliar and intimidating to me. I've always written alone. I tried to have an idea, but my brain had frozen into a cold, hard mass of lifeless tissue. For about an hour, the only coherent thought I could form was, I'm sitting right next to Steve Martin. But gradually my brain began to thaw as I realized a surprising thing. These people were all remarkably generous. I had assumed that they'd be competitive, lobbying for their own jokes, maybe even criticizing other people's. But it wasn't like that at all. In fact, it was the opposite. If somebody came up with something good, the laughter around the table was instant and genuine. If somebody came up with a joke that needed help, everyone tried to think of ways to improve it. Many jokes mutated through a number of forms, with various people coming up with various elements until eventually there was no way to tell whose joke it was. This is the way it works in Hollywood. Almost everything is collaborative. All of these people have spent many hours sitting in writer-filled rooms just like this, dreaming up stuff. By the second meeting, we were comfortable with each other and with the way Martin liked to work. There was a clear pattern to the way he reacted to ideas. When somebody tossed out a joke, Martin would most of the time nod and say, "Yeah, yeah, yeah." Martin would most of the time nod and say, "Yeah, yeah, yeah." This meant no. He almost never actually said no because he's a genuinely nice guy and he wanted to let the joke tosser know he appreciated the effort. But yeah, Y-A, definitely meant no. When Martin liked an idea enough to at least consider using it, you could tell because he typed it into his computer. The tap, tap, tap of his keyboard was kind of like applause. If he really liked the joke, he'd perform it, trying different wordings and deliveries. Sometimes he'd even stand up to do this, giving it the full stand-up comedian treatment. And if it was your idea, you'd think at least I did. If it was your idea, you'd think at least I did. Steve Martin is performing my joke. I ended up greatly enjoying the whole Oscars experience, especially getting to know Steve. He is, as you'd expect, very smart and very funny, but he's also serious, meticulous, and intensely analytical in his approach to his craft. He spent hours rehearsing the opening monologue, constantly adding, cutting, and tweaking jokes right up until the day of the show. On Oscars night, we writers, clad in formal attire, watched from a small room just off stage, equipped with monitors and a direct phone line to the teleprompter operator. After each of his segments, Steve would join us to review how it was going and discuss possible changes to upcoming material. He was remarkably calm and focused, always looking for ways to make the show better, even as the show was going on. At one point, Michael Moore, who won the Oscar for Best Documentary Feature, launched into an angry speech ripping President George W. Bush and the Second Gulf War. It was the first overtly political moment of the show, and it definitely changed the vibe in the theater. There was some booing. Moore's speech was followed by a commercial break, after which Steve was due back on stage. In the writers' room, we felt he needed to address the situation. We had maybe 3 minutes during which we somehow, I was there but I can't really explain what happened, came up with a joke. When Steve went back out, he said, "It's so sweet backstage, you should have seen it. The Teamsters are helping Michael Moore into the trunk of his limo." That got a big laugh, and the show went on. And here's a picture which is captioned "Backstage at the Oscars, Steve Martin, me, Bruce Valanche, and Rita Rudner." There we go. So that was a thrilling way to experience the Oscars. Michelle, who was in the audience, also had an exciting time. She had an excellent seat directly in front of Bono. That's right, Michelle had a better seat than Bono, and in the same row as Julie Andrews, who is one of Michelle's absolute favorite people, ranking just below our daughter, but well above me. After the show, we sat at Steve's table at the Governor's Ball, where we met a cavalcade of movie stars and discovered that many of them, Julia Roberts, for example, are minuscule humans who apparently never eat any meal more substantial than a Tic Tac. It was a fantastic, memorable night, although by the end of it, Michelle's feet were in critical condition and I was carrying her shoes. I wrote for Steve again in 2010 when he co-hosted the Oscars with Alec Baldwin. I haven't done the Oscars since then, although I have remained involved in the movie industry in the sense that I've had screenplays in development. In case you're unfamiliar with the movie industry, I should explain what we mean by the term a screenplay in development. We mean a screenplay that will never become an actual movie. At least that has been my experience. Writing for the movies turns out to be very different from the kind of writing I've done for most of my career. When you write for print, newspapers, magazines, books, this is the process. 1, you write something. 2, you submit it to an editor. 3, the editor edits it. 4, it gets published. Some of these steps may take a little time. For example, the editor might want to make some changes, which you and the editor might discuss. But these 4 steps are essentially the process for print. Now here, based on my experience, is the process for writing for the movie industry. 1, you write a screenplay. 2, you submit it to your agent. 3, 6 months pass. 4, your agent calls with exciting news. A company you've never heard of that is somehow connected with the movie industry has optioned your script. They want to schedule a conference call ASAP. 5, 6 more months pass, during which the conference call is rescheduled 4 times because everybody in the movie industry is very, very busy. 6, the call finally happens. There are somewhere between 3 and 8 people on the other end. There's no way to tell. But they're excited about your screenplay. They love it. In fact, they're thinking of it as a project for Tom Cruise. with whom they are somehow vaguely connected. Also, there's a director whose name you don't recognize, but they say he's very hot and he might become attached, whatever that means. So while they're thrilled with the screenplay, they'd like you to make a few tweaks. Specifically, they want you to reimagine the setting, characters, plot, and overall concept. But they love it. They're eager to move forward. 7, you completely rewrite the screenplay and send it to the movie people. 8, absolutely nothing happens for 11 months. 9, your agent calls with good news. The movie people love the rewrite and want to have another conference call ASAP. 10, 8 more months pass, during which the follow-up conference call is rescheduled 9 times. 11, you have the call. It sounds as though some, maybe most, of the movie people on this call are different from the ones who were on the first call. But whoever they are, they love the screenplay. It's perfect. However, now they're thinking of it as more of an Adam Sandler vehicle. They're wondering if you can make it less Tom Cruise-y and more Adam Sandler-y. 12, you completely rewrite the screenplay. 13, a year passes, during which the follow-up conference call is rescheduled 29 times. 14, you have the call. You're certain that this time you're talking to a completely different group of people. Nevertheless, they love the rewrite. Here's the thing, though. They're now seeing it as more of an Emma Stone vehicle or possibly Joe Pesci or, thinking outside the box, a musical featuring the pig from Babe. They'd like you to have another go at it with this in mind. You try to ask, with what in mind? But before you can speak, everyone has left the call. They're extremely busy out there. 15, you completely rewrite the screenplay with an Emma Stone, Joe Pesci type protagonist and a subplot involving a pig that sporadically bursts into song. 16, 2 to 5 years later, you have another call. This time there's only one person on the other end. His name is Liam, and he is at most 20 years old. You can hear video game noises in the background. Liam is a senior executive in a company that bought the company that originally optioned your screenplay. He loves your screenplay, or at least the title, which is the only part he has read. He's wondering how you would feel about adapting it as an episode of a series they're developing for Hulu about competing gangs of transgender Amish flamingo breeders. 17, you completely rewrite the script. And so on and on and on. You think I'm exaggerating, right? That's because, no offense, you've never had a screenplay in development. What I've described is, in fact, the process. You will keep rewriting your screenplay until not a single molecule of the original version remains. Why do you do this? Because they pay you. They pay you quite well in the movie business to crank out revisions of screenplays for movies that they're never going to make. How are they able to do this? What is the business model? Where does the money come from if there's no movie? My best guess is that many of the people in the movie industry are also in some other industry. Bathroom renovation, maybe. That is actually profitable. They're paying you to rewrite your screenplay with money they make from renovating bathrooms, which is time-consuming, which is why it's so hard to get them on the phone. I speak with authority here. I have a screenplay that has been in development long enough that if it were a human being, it would be dating Leonardo DiCaprio. My collaborator in this project is Alan Zweibel, a good friend and veteran comedy pro. He was one of the original Saturday Night Live writers and was the co-creator with Gary Shandling of It's Gary Shandling's Show. He has worked with everybody in the business and everybody loves him, which is quite an achievement. He also has a very large head, a head that would not look out of place on Easter Island, but he's sensitive about it, so I plan to delete this sentence later. A while back, Alan and I co-wrote a novel titled Lunatics about two suburban dads who get into a dispute over an offsides call at a children's soccer game and wind up purely by accident overthrowing the governments of both Cuba and China, bringing peace to the Middle East and running against each other for president of the United States. So it's not a work of gritty realism. It's a wacky romp. We sold the movie rights under a deal that had us write the screenplay. That was in 2012. We are still, as I type these words, rewriting the screenplay. Remember, this book was just released this year, so that's 13 years. We have done this multiple times over the years, each time tweaking the plot a bit more. Currently, it's a story about transgender Amish flamingo breeders. Not really, although we may get there before we're done. Despite the seeming endlessness of the process, I've enjoyed working with Alan, a very funny guy who's easy to work with once you get used to the size of his head, about which I will say no more. And footnote says, seriously, it's enormous. In fact, after we wrote Lunatics, Alan and I combined on 2 other books with a third collaborator, Adam Mansbach, who's the author of a heartwarming book of gentle, soothing poems for parents to read to their young children at bedtime, Go the Fuck to Sleep. Again, excuse my language. That's me, not him, saying excuse my language. Together, Alan, Adam, and I wrote For This We Left Egypt and A Field Guide to the Jewish People. These are humor books about Judaism. Our qualifications for writing them are that Alan and Adam are Jewish and I am circumcised. We did some fun publicity tours for those books. The events consisted almost entirely of the three of us telling Jewish jokes and two of us making fun of Alan's head. And in footnotes, he says, for his Jewish jokes, he says, for example, two Jewish men are standing on the deck of the Titanic as it sinks into the cold, dark sea. One of them starts sobbing. The other says, why are you crying? It's not your boat. And another footnote about the two of them making fun of Alan's head. The footnote says, because it's so big. Which brings me back to book tours, which have been a big part of my life, going back to my insanely improbable guest appearance on The Tonight Show. That was the beginning of what turned out to be a wild and wonderful ride for me as an author. I may not be a literary giant. I'll never have the critical acclaim of, say, Marcel Proust. But was Marcel Proust ever on Carson? Did he ever steal a hotel sign for Oprah? Does he currently have a screenplay in development? Did he write jokes for Steve Martin to deliver before an Oscars audience in which his, meaning Marcel Proust's wife, was sitting in the same row as Julie Andrews? Can Marcel Proust claim that books of his were made into a network sitcom, a Broadway play, and a major motion picture featuring both Zooey Deschanel and Sofia Vergara? Did Marcel Proust ever sing Gloria with Bruce Springsteen's singing backup? Was he, meaning Marcel Proust, even circumcised? The answer is no to the best of my knowledge. I know for sure he was never in The Remainders. My point is this. For a person who started out writing columns for the Westchester, Pennsylvania Daily Local News in between obituaries and meetings of the Regional Sewage Authority, I've had a damn good run. In fact, it's been a great run. I've had a charmed career far beyond anything I could have dreamed of. Of course, nothing goes on forever. There comes a time inevitably when you have to accept that no matter how much fun it has been, you've reached the end. And I regret to say that for me, that time has come. It's over. I'm referring to this chapter. And so it is, the end of that chapter, of chapter 7, Books, Music, and Movies. So in the next session, we will take up with chapter 8, which is titled appropriately The End, because it is the last chapter in the book, although there is an appendix, which I may read to you as well. But we'll close this session right now at the end of chapter 7. Take up with chapter 8 next time. Thanks for watching.